China is set to catch up with the influence of the US on the world. As the world's second largest economy, China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, looks to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Is that possible? How quickly can they achieve that? Join us as we discuss the reasons why the Chinese Yuan will fail to replace the dollar. Although the US dollar now serves as the world's reserve currency, this wasn't always the case. Portugal dominated the world's reserves until 1530, when Spain replaced it, followed by the Netherlands, France, and the United Kingdom's pound sterling. However, in the middle of the 1920s, the US dollar started to take over as the reserve currency of the world. One factor that unites the distribution of these previous reserve currencies across their empires is having an unsteady confederation of colonies and captured markets. This means that their ability to preserve their empires was a determining factor in their reserve currency, and if their empires lost influence, so did their currency. This is precisely what occurred to these empires, just as it did to Britain after the Second World War, when it lost most of its territories and the dollar took over. The United States benefited greatly from World War II because it supplied products and weapons to its allies and was repaid in gold by most of these nations, making the United States the largest gold holder. And in order to establish a new international monetary system after the war, and with Europe shattered, 44 representatives of the most powerful nations gathered in the United States for what we now call the Bretton Woods Accords. It led to the selection of the dollar as the world's reserve currency and gold as its underlying asset. Unfortunately, the Bretton Woods system came to an end in 1971, which meant that instead of having a gold backing, currencies now have a fiat backing, which is provided by people's belief in paper money. Yet the dollar continued to be the world's reserve currency after the collapse of the dollar-gold standard system, because it was the most sensible option. Even after half a century, it is still the most sensible decision given that the dollar has recently done quite well in spite of being printed in the trillions and having a high level of public debt. Nations of the world choose the dollar because they seek safe havens to secure their wealth in the face of geopolitical instability. The world cannot rely on China to provide this. It's with an iron fist and dubious methods that the Chinese government tightly regulates all activities that take place within its borders. Compared to the US administration, the Chinese government glaringly lacks transparency. By limiting the flow of capital, Chinese residents are only permitted to transfer out of China an amount no greater than the equivalent of $50,000 per year. In the event that tight capital controls are imposed as a result of a political or economic crisis, investors run the danger of losing their fortune. The volume of trade or the size of the economy is not the main factor in determining a currency's designation as a world reserve. China has experienced territorial conflicts in the past, and still does with its neighbors, including Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and India, together with other countries including Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. These tensions also spread some instability and leave a number of questions unanswered. The United States, on the other hand, enjoys a favorable geographic position that provides long-term security and stability. It shares borders with Mexico and Canada, two friendly nations, and is fortified by two oceans. Also, the presence of the strongest armed forces in the world means that no nation would dare invade it. All of this enables the dollar to continue to be a viable option for protecting wealth during difficult times, while not being backed by gold. On the other hand, China has tight control over the yuan, despite calls from the US and other Western nations for the yuan to be more liberalized. China insisted on market interventions as recently as last April, boosting the yuan to prevent disruption as the world's second-largest economy transitions from export dependency to domestic consumption. And statistically speaking, the dollar is still appealing during uncertain times. The value of the dollar has increased and is now levels that have not been seen in 20 years when compared to other currencies. To put it another way, getting a dollar now requires trading more other currencies. China, whether it admits it publicly or not, wouldn't mind its currency having those privileges as long as there is such high demand for the dollar. As a result, the United States can print almost as much money as it wants. It is pushing the UN to obtain that status because of this. Since 1913, when the Federal Reserve Bank assumed control, the genuine dollar value has decreased by 95%, A dollar now is now only worth 5 cents from 1913. The only thing that Americans are currently producing is debt, and China has been busy shaking hands with third world leaders and keeping them knee-deep in debt. China and 5 other countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Chile, announced a collaboration in July 2022, in which each would contribute 15 billion yuan or 2.2 billion USD to a reserve fund using their own currencies. The reserves held by Russia, on the other hand, are 17% yuan denominated. The third most sought-after currency on the Moscow Stock Exchange is the Chinese Yuan. The so-called BRICS economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, also gathered in 2022 to discuss plans for creating a new global reserve currency based on a basket of currencies. Through these ties, the yuan's chances of becoming the world's reserve currency are increased, while the dollar's power is diminished. It will still be a long time before it can fully replace the dollar, though. It seems more likely that the dollar will experience a long period of decline and that currencies pegged to precious metals, but not the yuan, will take its place. By most standards, China's economy has been incredibly successful. With a GDP of $17.7 trillion, it ranks second only to the United States. It is also the third largest trade country in the world, after the United States and the European Union. But the yuan only makes up 3% of world trade, contrasted with the US dollar 87% market share. Also, note that more than 60% of new foreign debt issues and 59% of global central bank reserves are denominated in dollars. In the meantime, Russia has already adopted the Chinese yuan as its de facto reserve currency, after being subjected to Western sanctions as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. The Russian leadership turned to China. The dollar's waning credibility in the face of the Chinese yuan's expanding sway is concerning, and it is due to the US's multi-trillion-dollar debt, the dollar's declining proportion in the world's money supply, and the Fed's quantitative easing program, which involves printing more money to boost the economy. The euro, yen, pound sterling, and Swiss franc are the next 4 most important reserve currencies. The yuan is not even one of them. Another persistent problem for the Chinese currency is that the majority of China's middle class is centered in a select few wealthy cities. We can only speculate as to how many strain these cities can withstand after witnessing how bad Beijing's air pollution is. As compared to the somewhat dispersed American middle class, its capacity to establish vibrant centers of economic activity in numerous locations, this is one of the nation's underappreciated but real economic strengths. The roughly 310 million Americans who are the base of the US dollar form a stable foundation, whereas the 1.3 billion Chinese who make up the yuan will begin to demand more rights from their government as they become wealthier. China excels in manufacturing, but a significant portion of global commerce also comprises financial, scientific, intellectual property, and information technology trade, among other things. It seems China would have to do more than just produce inexpensive goods if the yuan is to supplant the dollar in international trade. Yeah, China is starting to improve its infrastructure and exports, its engineering and construction to mostly underdeveloped nations. But it's a long journey, and the US will be a fierce competitor along the way. But the United States can only make so many missteps. At the brink of failure, the world would turn to alternatives, and China might just be waiting for that moment to spread its economic and political system throughout the world. In the past 15 years, 38% of US factories have been relocated abroad. On the other hand, China has experienced tremendous growth and today produces 50% of the world's steel. With the successful yuan's establishment as a reserve currency, China would have more international contracts that might be priced in yuan, alleviating China's concern over the value of the dollar. Yuan would be required to be held by all central banks as part of their foreign exchange reserves, increasing demand for the currency and lowering interest rates for bonds denominated in yuan. And the cost of borrowing would be cheaper for Chinese exporters. This would make China more powerful economically than the United States, backing President Xi Jinping's reforms to the economy and ultimately reshaping the face of our world. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you stay in touch with the big events as they unfold. Also, check out our other videos on your screen right now. Stay tuned.